Hey, happy Memorial Day weekend, everybody. Today, as we continue our creation to Christ story, we are going to spend time in the life of Abraham, the father of the faith. Now, Abraham's story starts with the promise. God comes to Abraham and says he will bless him and that he will give him descendants like the sea, like the sand on the seashore, and like the stars in the sky. So he gives him this promise. And he tells Abraham to leave the country that he's in, to pack up everything he has, and to leave and to go to a new country. So he packs up his stuff and he goes, having faith that God's going to do this. Now, the interesting thing that God has promised to give a descendants vast and populous to a person who can't have children. Him and his wife Sarah can't have any kids. They're barren. And so they leave having faith that God's going to do something. God's going to change that. Well, they wait a really long time. They wait a long time believing that they're going to have kids. And along the way, they get into a lot of trouble. At one point, they go to Egypt. Abraham lies about his wife being his sister. They get into a lot of trouble. And they leave Egypt, going back to the land of Canaan. At another time, they get into a big battle with kings, with different kings around the area. And they end up coming through okay, but they seem to always be getting in trouble. And Abraham is continually having to put his faith in God. And as time goes, they still don't have a son. Abraham is worried. Pretty much their time to have children is up. If it hasn't happened now, it's probably not going to happen. And so Abraham, in his old age, asked God, God, you said I was going to have a son. You said I was going to have descendants. I was going to have children. Where are they? I don't have any. And at that point, God makes a covenant with him. And he calls Abraham and he makes a covenant and promises to Abraham that he will provide for him. He will give him descendants to not just bless him, but to bless nations beyond him. So people and descendants beyond his family will bless the world. It's a great story, right? Well, it'd be great if he had a kid. Well, Abraham and Sarah get so frustrated with waiting that they decide to take that into their own hands. And so they have somebody else have a kid for them. To have a kid for them. Now, God redeems this, but it's not his plan. And eventually, Sarah finally has a child. She has a child. And they are elated by it. They're so happy. Finally, the promise is fulfilled. It seems that the father of the faith and Sarah, they finally get to have their child. The promise is finally true. But that's not the end of the story. You see, the end of the story you have in Genesis chapter 22. We start in Genesis chapter 12. And when we get to Genesis chapter 22, God calls Abraham to go and lay down his son and sacrifice him on an altar. Now that seems really weird. I know it sounds weird coming out of my mouth, but that's what he asked him. It's kind of a practice of the day back then. But see what happens. He goes up to the mountain and he lays his son down, getting ready to sacrifice him. And then Abraham is stopped by God. He stopped by God and said, do not hurt him. And when he turns up to look, he sees that there's an animal there on behalf of his son to be sacrificed. And God talks to Abraham and tells him, I now know that you have faith in me, that you love me above anything, even the thing you hold most dear, your son. You see, all these things that Abraham was going through, not having able to have kids, going through trials in famine and war, going through inner conflict in his family, all these things were leading and refining Abraham to trust God, to have faith in God. And sometimes in these stories, Abraham doesn't have faith. He doesn't trust God. But near the end, we see that Abraham's heart has changed. Now this week, with our Creation of Christ story, why don't we try to communicate this story from Genesis chapter 12 through Genesis chapter 24 to someone else who doesn't maybe know it yet. And let's practice storing the Bible together so we would know it together. It's really helpful to read the passages and then practice just summarizing them for you and your friends, but also use it as an opportunity to share that God fulfills promises, that He doesn't make mistakes even when we do. He redeems situations that seem terrible, and He makes them right. He brings life out of barrenness. He brings hope out of destruction. And He did that in Abraham's life, the founding father of faith. And He helps those, like Abraham, who really have a hard time with faith, to grow and to trust Him. So let's do that